This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues and ideas that shape our lives, with your guide, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Good morning, Matt. Good morning, Connell. It is morning. Which is great. I've got a nice cup of coffee here that Connell kindly brought in for us, along with croissants. Is that how you say it, Matt? Yeah, I thought you would know how to pronounce that correctly.
Oh, no.
No, you don't? Okay, good. Right, yeah, well, I'm going to
It's
take...
not German.
In my opinion, then it's croissants, which leads nicely into our topic today. Welcome, listeners, to Thrive Perspectives. And actually, the title of our podcast is actually going to speak really well into this topic that we're talking about today, because, Matt, we're going to be looking a little bit about how we approach our perspective or our opinion in a culture that really is pretty opinionated these days. So, Matt, why don't you introduce this topic as we continue our Christian Worldview series?
Yeah, so the thing that I'm concerned about, and increasingly concerned about, as I look at our culture, is the way in which our culture is kind of tearing itself apart and polarizing based on different opinions about different issues, and how heated those arguments get between the different factions, even within, I've known even within families to split based on opinions. I mean, even over things like American politics or the Middle East, or these arguments get so heated, and part of what allows for that is that people are so self-assured about their opinions. I mean, to hold a really strong opinion, even to the point where you will, put a relationship in jeopardy, man, you need to be really sure that you're right about that. And in most cases, I doubt whether...
Well, and we base that assuredness.
People are as sure,
exactly.
know as much as they think.
That's right. We base it on social media feeds, and there's so much information out there that's throwing at us all the time. This
is largely what enables this. Is, I mean, I've heard it said before, a little bit of information is pretty dangerous, and we'll talk through that a little bit. But we live in the age of information. Now people are saying we live in the age of disinformation, or at least competing sources of information, all that seem to sort of contradict each other. And so people kind of gather around those things as well. But the concern, and I'll say right up front, my concern is that as Christians and as a Christian community, we need to be modeling something different. We need to model what a different situation could look like. And I think we can. I think with a bit of humility and the right sort of relational principles, that doesn't mean that we avoid topics. I think we can talk about these things. Of course, it's important that we recognize the relative importance of various issues and so forth. But that's that's my concern is, first of all, what's going on in our culture. I have a concern when that comes into the church and the church starts splitting over those things and people become alienated from each other based on, different opinions on things. I think that's a disastrous situation, because, as I said, I think that we can do better as a church. And there's such a big emphasis throughout the New Testament on unity. And I think it's important too to say up front that unity does not mean uniformity. It doesn't mean that we all think the same things. I mean, there's a certain amount of conviction that we need to have on the core elements of our faith. But arguably, those core elements are things that all Christian denominations, with exceptions, share. And so, in a sense, I don't think that's hard. So, yes, there are certain fundamentals that we need to be aligned with, and so. This was the concern that I had in coming into this conversation. Now, I think, and one of the things that might first come to people's mind is, yes, but isn't the history of the church, riddled with doctrinal controversy and Christians arguing with each other about these sorts of things? Well, yes. That is true to some extent. A lot of those discussions have been quite constructive, though. I mean, robust discussion about things has always been helpful. I mean, throughout the history of the church, robust discussion has allowed for a lot more clarity, a lot more depth of understanding. It's all about how we have those conversations. And yes, there have been rifts in the church between, the Eastern and Western church originally, that, around 1000, what we now know as the Orthodox tradition split off from the Catholic tradition. There was some doctrinal stuff behind that, but it was a lot to do with authority and what they recognize as final authority. Another thing that I've heard is, and particularly from a Catholic perspective, and this is a criticism of Protestantism, well, there you are, you're all split off into different churches and you all do different things. And how is that unity? Well, again, my response is unity is not uniformity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in the early church up until pretty much 325, the Council of Nicaea, the Christian church there was quite a lot of diversity in the way that things were done in Christian churches. There was even a fair bit of diversity around elements of belief. Now, there were some things that I think from the time of the Council of Nicaea, after Constantine, the Roman emperor, became a Christian, and he got all the bishops together and said, look, we need to, he facilitated them coming to some level of agreement on some core, and those were some fundamentals, and they did come to some agreement on that. But from that time on, the idea of there being one church with one guy in charge, to caricature it,
yep,
that's not necessarily unity. Just having one guy in charge and complete uniformity across all churches. I think one of the beauty of the Protestant movement is that we recognize the Bible as our final authority, but there are slightly different interpretations. And actually, within broadly speaking, the Protestant community, there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of healthy debate going on. So the diversity actually can be a strength.
Yeah. I think it'd be fair to say too, within the Catholic tradition, there's also good debate and stuff that goes on.
There's great debate. Yeah, that's true. Those debates also get solved to some extent. But you're right. There is a fair bit of diversity within the Catholic tradition. But I think it's important that when it comes to what we do and the way that we do things. So there are fairly universal forms of worship in the Catholic Church that are implemented all around the world. And, there are some differences there, and that's all fine. As I said, I like the diversity. I think that's in the Protestant movement. I think that's a healthy thing. So the point is that we can have differences on things, and we can have robust discussion. That's helpful as long as we're able to have the robust discussion. And I guess where I want to get to here is, what is it that enables constructive discussion around various issues, and how can we model to a society that is tearing itself apart and people are polarizing into groups, and there's increasingly miscommunication between those groups. How can we model something different?
And even within families,
that's right.
Even come right down to the family unit. There are, even through the COVID situation where people had different opinions.
That's right. Yeah.
Very divisive within families. So even down to that core.
But you can recognize it within yourself as well. I don't know about you guys, but I can get quite angry over something that's so.
Yeah,
why am I getting angry or taking it so personally?
Yeah.
It's just, I think being able to stand back and sort of at least look at yourself that way and go, well, why am I behaving like that? You know?
And I think that's one of the big issues for me in the whole robust debate thing, is it's really difficult to keep that confined to the issue and not have it transfer across to the person. I think that's a big challenge. If someone believes a certain thing and we disagree with that, suddenly we think completely differently about that person when it's just that issue.
Yeah, that's right. The anger is also probably a symptom of a deeper problem. And I don't want to convict you too early in the episode. We'll get to there, But I think the first thing, and I'm just going to refer back to a previous episode that we did on the nature of our knowledge of God and the fundamentals of our faith. One of the things that I underlined there is that we have a very immediate first-hand knowledge of that. We have even a more immediate knowledge of God because God is living within us, and we have this first-hand. It's in a sense, as I've said, we're immersed. Not only are we immersed in the presence of God, but God is actively at work within us. Even there's nothing that we know more intimately and immediately than we know God. Yeah. And now someone might ask, well, what about atheism? And well, sometimes the very immediacy of that knowledge is why we don't recognize it, because we're used to what I've referred to in a previous episode as this subject-object knowledge. It's an object out there that I know I can look at. I can sort of circumscribe it intellectually and grasp it in a sense. Well, you can't do that with God. And so that kind of power knowledge or control knowledge that is typical and validly formed, that's scientific knowledge. We have this tendency to only recognize that as knowledge. Now, what I've argued is that there is actually a more immediate form of knowledge that we tend not to want to recognize. And the knowledge that we have of God, certainly the knowledge that we have of the work of the Holy Spirit and the effects of the work of Christ in our lives. This is a matter of first-hand knowledge. What that means is that we become witnesses, and the New Testament talks about us being witnesses. Now, in a world with conflicting opinions, in the first century, there's plenty of that. There were different philosophical schools, and it says in Acts chapter 17, it talks about the Areopagus in Greece, this forum where they'd all get together, and it says that they love to do nothing else but argue all day, and debate about all their different opinions. So this was around in that time. There were different people with different opinions and leading different philosophical schools. But it's interesting the way that the New Testament distinguishes the Christian message from that, because it's very careful to say we don't have another opinion. What we have is a witness. We're first-hand witnesses to something. Yeah. And so that puts our Christian witness on a completely different footing to, say, an opinion that I might have about how to solve the Middle East crisis or the war in Ukraine or whatever it is, or American politics or Australian politics or whatever it is that we might want to argue about.
The problem is there that opinion actually supersedes the witness.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a big, that becomes a big problem when this, I think, is a very big problem with Christian witness. When Christians go out with these very strong opinions about things, the noise of that drowns out our witness. So, in fact, look, one of the things that concerns me the most is the self-assuredness about our opinions and perhaps our readiness to go out and spout our opinions compared with our relative reticence or shyness about sharing our faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
People love going out and getting into expressing their opinions and just can't wait for the opportunity to express their opinions. Imagine if we all had the same passion and readiness to actually share our witness as Christians. Man, there'd be revival, right?
There would.
Yeah. So this is a big problem. Why are we so evangelistic about our opinions? And yet, and actually that, that can cause all sorts of issues for us and others, and yet so relatively slow to share, to share our Christian witness. Yeah. So that's a problem. And I think part of our Christian witness, is the way in which we hold our opinions and the humility with which we hold that. Yeah. So I think the answer to this situation is humility. I think humility with how we hold our opinions in our culture is enormously countercultural, and as it would be an amazing witness in our context. So as a way of just broaching this issue, I just want to really underscore the difference between Christian witness, what we know in this firsthand, what our witness is and what our opinions are, but even then within knowledge of other things. There are levels of knowledge that we can have about things. And in philosophy, you talk about epistemic rights. Am I within my epistemic rights to claim a certain, to claim that a certain theory is true or something? And there are levels.
So what, just for the dumb ones like me in the room, explain what epistemic rights is. That because from your personal experience you can claim that to be true, or what's
that's
that
right.
meaning?
So there are different. So episteme is knowledge in Greek. So it's about, do I have a right to this opinion? Like what is the level of certainty that I can have about this certain thing that I'm claiming? Right.
Yep.
Now, I can claim with a fair degree of certainty that you guys are sitting here in front of me in this room. Okay. But if let's say I wasn't part of this podcast and I was somewhere else, well, I could, I could surmise that, well, you guys had scheduled 10:30 to be in this room, and I could say, well, Connell and Stuart are most probably in the studio recording a podcast. But anything could have happened. You could have crashed your car on the way. So I don't have as much certainty about that as I know with here, because I'm here and I'm seeing it right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So for me to say, if I wasn't here, Stuart and Connell are in the studio, well, I'm one step removed, from that, let alone if I just didn't know anything else about, that you'd scheduled that. So there are levels of...
Great. That's good. Good.
So it's almost like there's probability attached to almost all knowledge. Like, could we ever be 100%?
You could speak in terms
certain.
of... That's right. You could speak in terms of...
Can we be 100%?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the probability as much as...
Certain.
Well, I'm talking about the probability of us knowing that that's the case.
Yes.
But we can put like a measurement, not that you'd measure it, but, it's like a scale. Like some things we can be more certain about than others. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so there, there are certain things, that I know. So, that perhaps I might know more than you, and there are certain things that you would know, more than me. So, as a, marketing analyst, there are certain things that you would know about how to do things in the field of marketing. Mm-hmm. I could have an opinion on that. It's like, yeah, I reckon that, when you first described to me some of your approach to marketing, I'm thinking, I don't reckon that's a good idea. That's a bit like, and then I had to think, well, Connell probably knows what he's talking about here. Yeah. And I probably don't. You know what I mean? I probably know less than you. Right. Now, I know a fair bit about, about Kierkegaard. I did my PhD on Kierkegaard. Now you guys might know little bits and pieces. So the point is, so therefore, because of the research and the study that I've done on that, because of your experience in marketing analysis, we each have a certain level of epistemic right to claim certain.
Okay, that's great.
That's defined. You can hold your opinions about what works in the marketing space with a much greater degree of confidence than I can have.
Yeah, but never 100%.
No, that's right. That's right. Never 100%.
And you can be a scientist and
still not be 100%.
The science, you can be any kind of scientific. The whole scientific method is based on the idea that you can always be proven. That's right. An alternative, and you've always got to be. So you've always got to hold that in your hand. And that I might be. This is the best explanation we've got now, but we're open to the fact that it may be wrong, and we need to change it.
That's right. And typically, people who have the highest levels of expertise in a given area, they tend to be the people who will be the first to acknowledge that. It's often certitude in relation to complex issues is invariably a symptom of ignorance because the world just isn't that clear cut. It's particularly when you're talking about politics. I mean, even in scientific issues, to say, oh no, this is 100%, this is the case. Now, I mean, I think there are some things that they're probably close to that, but even then, the beauty of the scientific method is that it's always open to falsification, this process of falsification. And so it's interesting that people who are experts on certain issues will often hold those. Well, they'll say things like, we think that this is the best way to go, but they also understand because being an expert in an issue means that you have confronted all of the opposing options as well. And so that has a way of bringing a degree of humility to that. Like, I think this is the case, but I've considered the strongest arguments. Now when and there's an element of appropriate humility to that. Now, when I find myself feeling angry about, let's say, someone's views on the Middle East crisis, right? How could they? Or American politics. It's so ridiculous that they would think that they would think that. The best thing to do is to read the best versions of the opposing argument. And this is pretty complex, know, and there is something to that, to that other perspective.
But I think the best experts, and by any time I've actually spent time studying it, I think you go through this phase of where you get a little bit of knowledge and you go, that's it, I get it.
Yeah,
I've learned it all. I understand
because you've read a few
it.
articles and watched some YouTube clips, and
But then as you start to study it more, then the complexity opens up into kind of a web of things that you don't know. And then as you kind of try to resolve them and study them, then the next layer of complexity reveals itself. So if you talk to the real experts in the field, they always describe themselves as still being a student, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
so, and that the dangerous place for an expert to get to is where they become arrogant in that and go, I've spent all this time studying this and, you know, I kind of know it all, and I stop learning. So the best place and you can see in yourself, in any kind of skill that you learn, you always move through that kind of, you know, unconscious incompetence moves to conscious incompetence and so on. And it's that progression of knowledge that is.
And that's a really good point because a lot of people get trapped in the unconscious incompetence and a step forward in acquiring knowledge is to become conscious of incompetence.
Yeah.
You know, and famously, this was famously the what Socrates in the around 400 BC in Athens, he would go around and he would discuss issues with people that had very strong opinions on things, and his goal was to show them that they didn't know as much as they thought that they knew about that, you know. And so a lot of the Socratic dialogues that are recorded by Plato, a lot of the earliest ones that are more true to Socrates, you get this kind of you don't get something firm at the end. You get you get something. You do get something at the end, but not something as 100% as you started with. And
it's prompting the question more than it is giving the answer, in a sense.
That's right. So someone once asked Socrates, because it was well known that that he was credited with being the wisest man in the land, and he said, well, if I'm wise, it's because I know how ignorant I am. That wisdom is knowing how ignorant you are. And and I'm talking about, like objective facts here, because remember, I think we can be completely confident with our witness as Christians. I think that's where our confidence, we can literally to the point of dying for that, we know that we know that we know. Part of the problem, I think, is the way that also we get our information, because the short form, the shorter the form, like the sort of TikTok or the 30-second or even the 3-minute YouTube clip on something, the grab from someone. The shorter the form it is, the more, the less likely it is. What am I trying to say? The short form is problematic because it doesn't allow for the complexities to come out.
The whole context.
And it's also that person's opinion.
Yeah,
well, they've interpreted the facts and distilled it down to a little 30-second narrative.
On that, I really would just want to highlight this, because I think the danger is, in today's age, we don't want to do the work of researching and asking all the questions and reading all the alternative positions and understanding. We just want to be told what's truth. And once you start down the social media, you're going to get reinforced the first thing you clicked on over and over again, which then makes you think there's this huge body of evidence that proves that position is correct, because that's what it's designed to give you, what you want to read. And so I think one of the challenges for us is we need to, as you said, Matt, not hold really strong opinions unless we're like those experts who have looked at all the opposing possibilities, because then we do recognize how incompetent we do become conscious of how much we don't know,
What I'm calling for here is not us saying, we don't know, and just shrugging our shoulders and not caring about anything, because there are serious issues in the world, and we live in a democratic society, and that means we hold our government accountable for what they do and the decisions that they made. Now, for us as voters to hold them accountable for the decisions they made, we do need to have some level of engagement with the issue. And this is the problem increasingly with democracy in this age of
misinformation.
Misinformation is that you get people polarizing into these groups and completely different sources. And I mean, honestly, it's how democracy is going to, particularly now with AI and how AI can, what AI can do, how democracy is going to work moving forward. But that's another issue.
But it's playing into the fact that we tend to become tribal too. So we absorb information that aligns with something that allows us to become part of a particular tribe. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways it's not just about the opinion. It's almost like it gives us a sense of belonging and something to become passionate about. Yeah. Like I'm passionate about this political issue. Yeah. And so that sense of being energized by an issue and even getting angry about it and going out and protesting and arguing with people and trying to get people to convert to my viewpoint, it becomes almost like a mission of my life in a way and that I share with other people.
And I don't think I've ever seen that done in a way that doesn't eclipse someone's witness.
I was just going to say, I think, the challenge there is as Christians, just looking at the Christian community, we can be, as you just said, more passionate about arguing about some political issue or something or other than we ever are about advocating for what we can know to be true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I mean, I remember, the whole passionate thing. I remember watching a documentary on Netflix. It's not a promotion for it, about flat earthers. And they were so convinced and so passionate that towards the end I'm going, am I missing something here? It's like these guys seem at conferences and communities, and it's like it built this whole sense of belonging. And I think you're absolutely right. That feeds into our sense of wanting to belong to something as well.
Yeah. And to be clear too, I'm not, like there is a real place for advocacy for people that can't speak for themselves or for people who are oppressed, or there's really something to say for advocacy for people like that, because that is that's something that is I guess part of being concerned for each other. So I think advocacy is important, but even there you need to understand the issues. One thing to advocate for a group of people, and another thing to know what it is that's going to solve the problem for them.
Totally.
And so sometimes our passion for one thing gets mixed up with our passion for another thing. So I might be passionate about advocating for this certain group of people, but then I assume that I know what the best solution is for that group of people. So we've just got to make sure we separate the issues. I might be a passionate advocate for the need to do something about our environmental situation, but then the politics is very, very complex, and what the right policy is, and the
economic impacts,
the economic impacts on not only in our country but on third world countries, and we just. The more I look into that, as passionate as I am about, recognizing the problem and stewarding our, this world that God's given us, yet I recognize the immense complexity in trying to deal with that politically. In fact, in some ways, I wonder if that's even possible to come up with political solution for that. But we should try, and so we shouldn't not do anything, and we should advocate for those issues, but assuming that we know what the solution is.
But you're not building it in as part of your identity, like that tribal identity. Yeah. It's not the thing that totally motivates you. So you hold it loosely in your hand, that you're willing to challenge that. It's not that if someone manages to prove you wrong on something, you're going to be like emotionally crushed. Your identity's being, and so you've got to fight to maintain, hold on to that viewpoint.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've got to be able to hold it at arm's length and loosely.
Yeah.
So that if alternative facts get revealed to you, that you're quite happy to shift how you see that and reshape your opinion.
Yeah.
So the issue there is opinions should be held. If you're going to have an opinion, hold it loosely and somewhat at arm's length, recognizing there's a whole lot. It doesn't matter how much you know about it, there's still a whole lot you don't know about it.
Yeah.
And Matt, as we take a pause here in the podcast, one of the things I know you've been doing recently is calling into prisons and meeting with prisoners in the local prisons around where we are. And for a number of years now, for nearly a decade actually, we've been sending Thrive, the Bible reading guide you write, into prisons in large quantities.
Yeah.
I think we send nearly 4,000 copies of Thrive across prisons all over Australia. But you received a note from one of the chaplains at one of these prisons that you're calling into.
Yeah. So I have the note here that says, as a prison chaplain, I've seen how much Thrive is appreciated by those in prison who are seeking to follow Jesus. A number of daily devotional booklets are available in prison. What is distinctive about Thrive is the guidance on daily reading of a specific book or books of the Bible each issue. This gives a reader a deeper understanding of the Bible while still offering an accessible and pastorally aware approach. I encourage your support in making Thrive available to prisoners.
Yeah.
Look, I've seen that. It's a wonderful resource for prisoners that have the time and ability, obviously, to engage with Scripture, but having something like that guides them through books of the Bible has made an enormous impact. So massively appreciate those who have sponsored those editions of Thrive. I've heard back from prisons all over the country. I've had letters from prisoners expressing their appreciation, some of whom have come to faith through reading the Thrive booklet. So massively appreciate the support from our supporters to make that possible.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So if you want to help us with this, obviously when we're sending 4,000 copies of Thrive into prison, there's a cost to printing those and shipping those and getting them there, and you could certainly help us do that. If you'd like to sponsor a prison subscription, it's just $16 a year, and that covers the cost of 4 copies of Thrive going into a prison somewhere in the country here. Then jump to the thrivetoday.tv website. Right at the top of the page, you'll see a heading that says sponsor a prison subscription. We would so value your support. Demand for this just continues to grow in our prisons. Thanks, Matt.
I remember just recently reading a book called Reading the Times, which is a theological reflection on the news. And it was really interesting. It was saying that it's very difficult for us to engage meaningfully with everything that we hear about. There are lots of big issues. But they did say, but we shouldn't therefore try to engage with everything and think that we know
as
everything
experts.
about everything, nor should we disengage. The recommendation the author was making was that we pray about it and recognize maybe a few areas that we can actually get to know and get involved with those areas, whether it be through advocacy or get to know some of the issues around those areas specifically. And I'm not sure how you sort of work that out.
Isn't that part of what God puts on your heart, though? I mean, there are people who have a real heart for, the socially disadvantaged, and they find God puts them in that space to do something about that issue. And other people, God will. Now, that doesn't mean that the refugee issue isn't important, or the whatever other issue isn't important, but it's just not on their heart, and God's got someone else for that work.
Yeah, that's right. And that look, there are some issues that I've read a fair bit on, and there are other issues that I haven't. I try to be across things fairly generally, but that's partly because I teach philosophy and ethics. But I do think that to understand the very complex issues that are the subject of contemporary debates, that they are the subject of heated debates because they're complex, because they're very complex. So given that complexity, it is therefore much more difficult for anyone, even the experts, to really, to come up with solutions or suggestions that they're certainly going to be very far from 100%. And so I think modeling humility looks like a recognition of, even if we do read up on that, first of all, being able to say, I don't know. I'd love to hear people say that more. I just don't know. This very complex issue. And I care. I care, but I just don't know what the answer is. Why do we have to always have an opinion?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I,
well, there's an ego there too, that I should know, or I at least want to make you think that I know.
That's right. Yeah. So, for example, I mean, I've very consciously practiced this in a theological sense. There are certain theological issues, let's take the issue, say an end times issue of how things are going to unfold in the end times, the issue of the millennium, and talks about in Revelation chapter 20, and there's different views on that, premillennialism and postmillennialism and amillennialism, and then within premillennialism there's all different versions of that. And people say, so where do you stand? Where do you stand on that? I want to be quick to say, well, I actually don't know. I haven't got I'm okay with not having a fixed opinion on that. And sometimes the response, well, you should read this. No, it's not that I haven't read the various arguments that it's because actually I have. And the more that I read the opposing arguments, the more I recognize how complex the issue is and how this is a grey area. Maybe it's meant to be grey.
Yeah.
I think that there are just issues that, particularly theological issues, and this is getting back
mystery.
to the island and the ocean, the mystery. There are just some theological issues that are below the surface that we're never going to be able to, that we're not meant to be black and white about.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to say, I just don't know. So I'm often saying, when people are saying, because it's often the grey areas that people polarize on, they might say, I'm a pre-mill. What's your, where are you? Well, I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of strengths to that view, but I see some issues with that as well. I don't know.
And why do you have to have?
Yeah.
Why do you have to land on one?
Yeah. Now, as long as there's something that I do know, and I believe that the things that we need to know for salvation and life and mission, we know those things, right? We're told what we need to know God and to live the life that God wants us to live. We know those things. We're told those things. And so a lot of those other things are like theoretical, like
doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, we've got to be prepared to, well, first of all, recognize where the grey areas are in Christian beliefs and not try and make grey areas black and white. We do no service to the Bible by doing that. So I guess in having practiced that already and saying, and with theology, like I do know a bit about the opposing views, and so I've gotten used to saying, look, about this, I just don't know. I haven't, I'm swinging around here, and so for me, that's been good practice. So when it comes to issues that I actually know less about, we've got the Middle East crisis, raging, and I mean, I have certain opinions about that, but I recognize the complexity. Do I have a better idea of what, of the way that things should work or not one that I could give much
and again,
credence to.
dare I call us back to the whole COVID thing, which most of the world's leaders had never experienced before.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to point the finger as armchair experts, but it's like, I'm glad I wasn't in the position where I had to make a call one way or the other, because either way, you're going to get clobbered.
I mean, the armchair experts abounded with that. And at the end of the day, I had to make a decision to trust the advice of my doctor.
Yeah.
I looked into it because with a lot of things like that, I just try to educate myself enough so that I understand, but at the end of the day, even what I read, I still have to take the advice of people that understand the issues better than I. And
the people having to make the big calls, the big decisions, they're having to take the advice of people as well. And I think this is where that important part of us as the church praying for our leaders, even when we disagree with them, because they're in a position where they have to make a call. They can't just sit on the fence.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's worth saying too, with the way that people express their opinions, you get this thing where people say, well, the data, the data speaks for itself, or these are just the facts, right? Well, for a start, data never speaks for itself. No. And facts always come interpreted. There's no doubt about, there's no doubt about that.
There's always a narrative.
Yeah, there's never, we don't have, bare facts don't really exist. There's always an element of interpretation to that. So I guess it's recognizing, again, this is recognizing sort of what you don't know. And I think a little bit of sort of basic critical thinking is needed, I think, to understand that the way that data works and that supposed facts work. It's just a little bit more complicated than it being at face.
Well, if you're going to build a narrative, it's built on facts, but the facts don't tell the narrative. The narrative's the interpretation, and you can produce different interpretations of that data and facts that kind of, because you're filling in the gaps in between that. This fact, so therefore you would build some sort of explanation around that and fill the gaps in. But there'd probably be a whole heap of different stories and narratives you can build around those facts.
Okay, so good point. So we build stories based on facts, but we also interpret facts in the light of the story that we believe.
That's right.
Again, facts never sit in a neutral space. There's always a framework. There's always a context in which a fact sits.
So, Matt, in trying to land this a little bit, to start getting to a sort of a landing point a little bit, as Christians, when we get into these sorts of situations, I think I've heard you say before, one of the things you always look for when you're having a conversation with someone who's perhaps not a believer, or you're always trying to find the common ground. What can we agree on? And I think it'd be great to kind of talk a bit about how we should approach that with the humility of our opinions, for want of a better word, and on world issues, recognizing that we know what we know about our faith and about who Christ is and who we're called to be in our salvation. But
one of the things I think we can model as a Christian community is the ability to have humble, robust discussion and have differences of opinions. I think I actually value within a church context that we have differences of opinion, even on actually a number of outlying doctrinal elements. And I'm saying outlying doctrinal elements because I think there are fundamentals that we need to agree on in order to. We have to be united around something, right? Yeah. But there are plenty of outlying things that I actually value robust disagreement, because as long as we're not getting lost in endless theoretical conversations about theology, and sometimes that can get
because at the end of
ridiculous.
The day, in some sense, it doesn't matter, but there are the core things. Our church is united around a set of core doctrinal issues.
Yeah, that's right.
Statements that's what unites us, and they're the core things. And they actually unite us with so many other denominations and churches and so on. So there's a unity from within our church, but it also unites us with the broader Christian context. And then within that, there's all those other things that they're interesting and they're worth thinking about because they could influence, how we think and respond and react to God and issues and so on. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be looking to unite around those issues in themselves because that they're not going to be. So a lot of people would leave a church because they want to go and find a church that believes a certain political position that they take. And you see that all the time. People, you didn't make some statement about something the government said. Oh, well, that's it. We're going to move on and find another church. That's not where you're going to find the unity. The unity can only come from those core things that are actually foundationally, fundamentally
and it's quite valuable to have within a church context differences of opinion, because it means we can have discussion, we can learn from each other, we can challenge one another. You actually want that that's an important dynamic, and I think if we are willing to have due humility, it's possible, but it's only possible if we're willing to have enough humility to be able to say, there's a pretty high chance that I could be wrong, so I'm going to listen to this person, and they might express, an opinion that challenges my point. Even in an area that I might be an expert at, sometimes you can get so close to an issue and think you know something when there's actually some blind spots, and someone coming from a completely different outside perspective can say, oh, but what about this? And you think, oh man, I've never thought of that before. So this is where I think it's important to preserve the diversity of the community so that we can be having, robust discussion and learn from each other. As long as, of course, we're not, I don't think that it's productive for Christians to be sitting around talking about politics and issues, because all of that becomes theoretical. I think let's be.
Well, you can talk about it,
focusing
but as
on the
long
core
as it's
things.
just interesting.
That's right.
It's not
as long as we're letting the main thing be the main thing.
You're not trying to build unity around that, because that's where we get to with our opinions. We're trying to get, if I'll be arguing with someone because I want to convert them to my opinion, and so I'm trying to build unity around that.
Yeah, I think even around church stuff and theological stuff, though, I think we can get bogged down in things, and I've often found myself, and I'm asking myself the question, knowing the answer to this, how's that going to change the way I live my life for Christ?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good.
If it isn't going to make any difference to how I look, why is it so important to argue this point?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Maybe a good model, based on what you've said, is that maybe the point of the argument is not so much to win the argument and convert someone to your opinion, but it's in the process of showing that there's more complexity behind an issue. What we said before, I think it's like Socrates was there to kind of like prompt questions and
question your certainty, really.
Question your certainty. And I think that's a valuable thing to be able to do, because people are holding these hard opinions and they're not going to shift. Maybe there's a big part for us to play in actually helping them see that the ground that they're standing on isn't as solid as they. Now, I'm not trying to change their mind, but at least, have you thought about this? Are you aware of this complexity?
Yeah.
Have you read this? Starting to build that out. So I'm not trying to convert you to what I think, but I'm just going to put stuff in there to soften the stance.
Yeah,
to lower.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
lower the hostility.
And the thing I think that does is that the more I recognize the grey areas, the more I appreciate what's black and white. And by recognizing complexity, like if the Middle East, if I'm looking at the Middle East crisis thinking, oh, they should just do this. Why is everyone being so stupid? And they should, there's this is the answer. Mm-hmm. Well, by recognizing the immense complexity, even, something close to insolubility about that, it brings me back to the fundamentals, because I think this world needs Jesus.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This world needs Jesus. The endless conflict of this world system is not going to Now, of course, we should do everything we can to bring peace in this world, but ultimately the problem is only going to be solved because of the complexity, right? Because of embedded multi-generational complexity in so many respects. This world needs Jesus. Jesus is the answer. And we need to come back to that. For me, looking at complexity isn't about just muddying the waters so much that you throw up your hands and think, I won't care. No, it's the opposite. I think there's so much complexity, and because I care, I realize that this world needs Jesus. And that's not simplistic. That actually is the answer that the Bible puts before us, because Jesus is ushering in a whole new kingdom, completely different world system. And that is the answer that the Bible brings to that. And we can have a taste of that reign of peace now, and we should do everything we can to give people a taste of that. But ultimately, all of these complex issues and the layers of complexity have come about because the world has been thrown into chaos, right? Yeah. And chaos is complexity, right? And only Jesus is the one that is going to bring order in this chaos, as with the beginning, with it, with a new creation. And so as we look on to a world that is tearing itself apart politically, with wars, with all these sorts of issues, the flood of disinformation, and I mean, you've got people scratching their heads thinking this is becoming so complex, even democracy itself, liberal democracies, which were the great hope, this is how we're going to bring about our political utopia. Even democracy looks like it's under threat now. And so you've got people thinking, oh man, this is just hopeless. Well, yes, without Jesus, it is hopeless. And that's why we trust in Jesus. That's why we put our hope in him alone.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Thrive Perspectives. Our hope is that these discussions will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective. You'll find all our resources at the Thrive Today website, thrivetoday.tv. If there's a topic that you'd like us to discuss, please email us. Our email is contact@thrivetoday.tv. Until next time, our prayer is that you will thrive.